Hello, and welcome to Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg. We're here to explore the imposter syndrome that haunts creatives, delving into how it affects their lives and work. Join us as we chat with authors and artists about creativity, self-doubt, featuring imposter characters in their stories, and the occasional imposter who pops up in their day-to-day lives.
And today is a triple trouble scenario. We have the great pleasure of welcoming to the show a trio of wonderful authors: Patricia Dunn, Deborah Levison, and Wendy Whitman. Patricia Dunn, who also publishes as T.M. Dunn, is an award-winning novelist, prolific essayist, highly sought-after writing coach, developmental editor, and ghostwriter. Her Father's Daughter is her latest award-winning novel. Deborah Levison is an author and publicist. Her first book, The Crate, won several literary awards and has been praised as heart-wrenching, harrowing, lyrical, and a brilliant story. Her forthcoming book, A Novel Crime, drops in March 2026. Wendy Whitman began her career in television, appearing on air as a producer-reporter for The Nancy Grace Show and working as an executive and producer for Court TV, where she received 3 Telly Awards and 2 GLAAD nominations. Since turning her attention to writing, Wendy has published 2 crime thriller novels, Premonition and its sequel, Retribution. Ladies, thank you all for joining us. We're very excited to have you here today.
Excited to be here.
Our pleasure.
Welcome.
For having us.
Yeah.
Woo, I'm going to be the first to say I have imposter syndrome. There's a lot of experience in the room.
Yeah.
but a lot of really cool, interesting things in all of your bios. Greg, I'm going to let you take the lead because I know you have some really good questions, and then I'm just going to interrupt you as I always do.
Perfect. We'll get into a nice flow that way. Well, let's start with this. I sort of met the 3 of you together, if not initially, certainly the first time I ever saw you, Pat. I think I actually met you for the release of Her Father's Daughter. But then very soon after, I saw the 3 of you together, and you've lately done these literary events together as the Crime Trio. Could you kind of talk about how that partnership came about initially?
Well, I'll start and then you can jump in. We were all like members of Sisters in Crime, right. And we met at a Sisters in Crime event. And we also realized that we were writing about our themes were similar, and we were either writing, we were inspired by true crime or true crime itself. Right. And honestly, we just really got along. Yeah. So we figured, hey, we got to promote our books, and I don't know how people feel, but talk about imposter syndrome when you're promoting work. But it's hard. It kind of sucks. Can I say suck on podcast?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want.
That's really
worked for the.
Oh, I'm going to do a lot worse than that.
Yeah. Okay. So so we talked about it, and I don't know how we came up with the name, but Deb also had this, great idea. She's got a great marketing background, and so we just talked about doing it. We started pitching to different places, and I found, and I'll let other people talk, that it was just so much fun, when you're doing these events, to talk about, our books, but our relationship to writing, and not intentionally, but one of the first earlier talks, maybe it was even on a podcast, that Wendy and I kind of went back and forth. I mean, we weren't yelling or screaming, but we got into this little kind of argument about, my feeling about serial killers versus her feeling, and they're more complicated, I believe, than she wants to believe. You know what I mean? So, but we figured, hey, it works, right? So, so you want to jump in, Deb or Wendy? Because I can just ramble on for.
Yeah, I think the cool thing was that the 3 of us have a slightly different relationship to true crimes. We've either been impacted directly, or we've had professional experience or indirect impact. But to market ourselves as a crime trio, first of all, I think it's a good branding. Yeah. And I think, venues like, say, a library would potentially be more interested in having 3 authors for the price of 1 sort of thing. So we've been having some good luck with this.
Yeah.
And I was just going to add that when people ask that question, I have to pause for a minute and think, I don't even remember how we met, because it seems like we've always been the crime trio to me. You know what I mean? It's sort of funny. And then I do remember the Halloween thing at Elise's, and that's sort of how it came about. But I actually couldn't clearly remember, because it just seems like we've been doing this. And we do each have different attachments to crime. I've never had anything personally happen to me, but through Court TV, all the cases became part of our lives. We just got very attached to the victims' families and the trials and all of that stuff. So that was it became part of my personal life, even though it wasn't happening to me.
Right. Well, could you expand a little bit each of you, if you wouldn't mind, just because you do each have these really sort of, they're different paths, but equally interesting to me paths. I've gotten to speak with you individually over the years, and you each sort of have this really, kind of interesting and unique entryway into writing crime fiction. Could you kind of give our listeners a little rundown?
Okay. Well, I didn't, I have 2 other books, out, and I've been teaching writing for decades, but, writing about a serial killer was kind of my happy place during COVID.
Right.
And I didn't, intend for that character, well, the way I write, the pantser thing, I actually like the term discovery writer. But I usually get a voice in my head and, that I deal with my therapist. And I start writing in that voice. And for some reason, it was the voice of this man. And it was also probably around not too far from the time my father passed. So I was kind of writing about this in this man's voice, and and then it turned out into his love story. And eventually he has this daughter, and eventually he started becoming a serial killer. And then the rest happened in other ways. But I think it makes sense that happened because I've been obsessed with serial killers since the summer I went through puberty at 12 was the summer that they used to call the summer of Sam. And Berkowitz, the 45, there's a lot of names, talk about names. 45 caliber killer was another one of his names. He killed my best friend's cousin right around the block from my house. And so it turned out to be my aunt's postman. And he was one of those like very nice guys that were quiet. Okay. And so I just got really obsessed with that. And then I got introduced at a very young age, maybe too young. Well, maybe I had to be older. Hannibal, that character. And what I really was like impressed with as a writer, but also is like how these they're very multi-dimensional people, and it's not all one thing, and I also got really fascinated with how they believe their truths, and that they justify, and also how when you try to figure out, and I think this is true for all our characters, when you try to figure out, like everyone tries to figure out what makes somebody a serial killer, and then somebody comes along and breaks that mold and ideas. So serial killer is kind of like that big thing, but I think that all of these things, and I got really interested in crime and mystery and all that thrillers, because I love dealing with what one thing seems when it's not, if that kind of makes sense, probably because I'm dealing with my own imposter syndrome all the time. Like I seem like one thing, but inside I'm another. So anyway.
Wendy, you have to jump in and talk about serial killers so that the 2 of you start arguing again, because I love hearing the 2 of you go at it.
Can I do it right now?
Yeah.
So I always refer to myself as the accidental author because my whole career was in television and covering crime, and I never had this burning desire to become an author. I think I'm like a lot of people, I think I have a book in me kind of thing. And when Core TV shut down, my boss's assistant told me you have to write a book. And it did take me, I said, well, I don't know if I can write a book. And she said, no, I know you can do it. Have to write a book. And she used to work at Warner Brothers Books. So she had a lot of contacts. So it took me about 5 years after we got fired. And I was working on Nancy's show at the time. And all of a sudden, it all sort of gelled, and I understood what I needed to do. And I was going to do nonfiction initially, but then I thought it'd be more fun to write fiction. And I realized I could, like I asked friends, is it okay for me to put true stuff in a fictional crime thriller? They go, you can do whatever you want. You're creating it. So when I realized I could do a lot of what I planned to do in a nonfiction book in a fiction book, then I decided to write a thriller. And the first night I stayed up all night writing, and I thought, wow, this might actually work, kind of thing. But as far as serial killers go, I know at the end we may talk about what our upcoming projects are, but I can mention it now. I'm working on a true crime memoir of my 20 years of covering crime, and I'm up to about 110 pages now. And I am devoting a chapter to serial killers, and I do include the son of Sam in that. And my take on serial killers is they're very deceptive, and a lot of them lead double lives, and their families, people say, how could the family not know? But like in the case of BTK, I don't want to get into too many different cases and details. His wife and children did not know at all, and he was doing it for decades on and off. And they're incredibly adept. The scariest thing to me about them is they are incredibly adept at blending in and leading apparently very mundane lives, but they're in their head, they're always thinking of these crazy things and doing crazy things. And they weave it into their life, like Gary Ridgway. He's a painter who was married 3 times in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle. And at night, after he went through this long day, he had enough energy left to go kill a bunch of hookers, and then he'd go back and rearrange their bodies and have sex. I mean, it was so sick. And I mean, they put in a long day. Like, I don't know how they do it. Like, they add all this insanity to their
Type A personality.
I mean, they do. They're overachievers. They have the families, they have the career, and then they still have time to kill people left and right. So it's a very interesting, psychological dynamic, I think.
Well, we're not going to fight, but I will.
But I think they're awful, and
No,
I don't see any redeeming.
Look, I don't want to actually hear people to think that I don't think they're all awful.
No.
I think it's just complicated. No, but what I wanted to say is that what Wendy said, this is where I do very much agree, where they go and have regular lives. When the killer the person that's being accused of the killing, which it seems like it didn't, of the serial killing in Long Island, when I actually wish my book would have, because it came out at the same time I booked that story. But anyway, didn't get to use it as much as I'd hoped. But anyway, so sorry. I'm very self promoting and all that kind of stuff. But everyone that, my sister, everybody was saying to me like, oh my God, that's so shocking. And I'm like, is it really? I mean, it would have been more shocking if people suspected him of being a serial killer. If he wasn't because if he was just somebody that, was so obviously a killer, I mean, he would not have been able to do it as long as he did and get away with it. So, yeah. And the question of why, I mean, I think that's why we write books, because we're trying to answer these questions that don't have answers a lot of the times, right? So we can give our reader something satisfying, even if in real life it doesn't make any sense. That's why I don't like true crime movies that are based on true crime, because usually for me, the endings are never as satisfying as I want. Like, never happy endings usually, because they can't be, right? It's because they're based on the true story. So I'm like, nope, don't want to go there.
Right.
And Wendy.
Well, I want to hear from Deborah, your path. Also, I don't think we got to hear.
Oh, I did, Deb. Sorry, not Wendy.
I was caught up waiting for them to get into blows here, but they didn't. They're calmer today. So my path. Well, I've always been a writer, always as a publicist though, which is more ghostwriting and journalism. I was a journalist for many, many years, and a columnist, but I had always wanted to write a book. And so back in the 90s, I wrote a romance. I thought that would be the easiest way to...
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, imposter syndrome. I'll tell you about that afterwards.
Oh, but she fell in love with a serial killer.
Hey, my husband's in the next room, so...
Oh, okay.
Anyway, I had always wanted to write a book. The romance didn't go anywhere. And about 10 years ago, something happened that literally dropped a story into my lap. So I'm Canadian, and I grew up spending my summers at our family lake house about 2 hours north of Toronto in this very, very pristine area of Ontario called Muskoka. And about 10 years ago, my family found a wooden crate that was nailed really tightly shut and shoved up underneath our family lake house. And when it was opened, it was the most gruesome thing you could ever imagine. And it became a murder case with an investigation, and my brother became the primary murder suspect. And it was covered on television and media, coast to coast. My family was pretty traumatized. And everyone turned to me and said, well, you're going to write this book, right? And so I did end up writing it. It became The Crate, which was my first book, and it's nonfiction. So it is actual true crime. And then my second book sort of evolved a few years later. I was working on these lawsuits as a publicist again, and they were lawsuits where these middle-aged men had come forward to allege that they'd been abused at very elite, very prestigious New England boarding schools. And I had to read through these complaints by men whose experiences dated back to the 80s, where they were, 12, 13 years old, very vulnerable boys in these sort of isolated elite schools. And I just couldn't believe what I was reading. And to me, it felt like, okay, this is not only a story that sounds like it should be a book or a movie even, but also kind of a social issue that we could kind of shine light on. Because as I was researching it, I realized, okay, well, I thought it all dated back to the 80s and ended in the 80s, maybe the 90s, but found out that no, it actually is still continuing today. So that story became A Nest of Snakes, which is not about snakes. I've gotten in so much trouble with this book, the title, the cover. It's not about snakes. There are no snakes in the story. But yeah, so that was my first two.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Well, and do you feel like, just specifically about, you said you're having trouble with that book in particular, are you hearing from people like, I am afraid of snakes, I don't like snakes, and that's why they...
Yes.
I mean,
so we were recently at VoucherCon, 4 of us were, and, I would kind of peek up in the bookstore to see what was happening with my stack of books, and I would literally watch people like reach for the book and then say to themselves, no, I don't want to read about snakes. Or I had one woman buy the book a few months ago, and she emailed me to say she couldn't start reading it until her husband put a brown paper wrapper over the cover.
That's how you know you have a killer cover, when they start to put a brown paper bag all over it.
That lady needs to do a TikTok campaign for you. That is awesome. Before we stray too much away from your guys' kind of origin stories, I was just curious, because you all have unique perspectives and firsthand perspectives of murder and the way it affects people in very different ways. And I'm wondering if you read Carolyn Fraser's book, Murderland, that just came out.
No, it's on my list, but no.
Well, I would be very curious to hear what you all think, because she kind of brings up the question of nature versus nurture, and her thesis is that it's a nature issue, and that's why the Pacific Northwest has such a high concentration. But from kind of like a writing standpoint, and then each of your experiences, do you feel like when you sat down to write each of your books, or maybe books you're working on now, are you focusing on environment more than psychology? Like, how does that factor into your developments? Are you plot first? Are you character first when you're writing your antagonists or protagonists?
Yeah, I'm very character first, which probably was why it takes so long for me to ever finish. But and then, especially like with my second book, that was actually about an activist who goes back home to an Italian-American family. And it turned out that it is a mystery, but it's all about this dysfunction, all of that. I knew that world. I was in that world. Funny, when I started writing it, it was just a modern day story. And then by the time it came out, they called it historical fiction, because the 91 was a little scary. Yes, but when anything that I write, I have to do a lot of research, right? So I think the nature versus nurture question, it comes up so much, and I've listened to and read all about this experts, and the one, I don't think one is more than the other. I think it all really depends. But I was really struck by, it was an NPR show, and somebody was being interviewed who was a scientist, and it was talking about serial killers. And the scientist, I guess his area was the brain. They kept he was very convinced that there's this one part of the brain that every serial killer is something something that's missing or whatever, that every serial killer's brain scan that they had matched the same thing. So he was very convinced, you can probably guess the punchline here. He was very convinced that it was definitely, nature, right? Then they put this brain scan in front of him, without a doubt. Yeah, serial killer. It was his brain scan. Then he got into, right, the whole thing of well, really, why did he not become a serial killer? I mean, I think it's are we predisposed or not? Now, there will be people, and to say nature, there are people that are, like Son of Sam, for instance. He was adopted as a baby, very, very loving family, small world. My husband's aunt and uncle lived next to him when he was a kid, and actually gave him a puppy, and they blamed themselves, but that's a whole other thing. But for the dog thing, whatever. But he was very happy. I mean, and so, and his parents were good people. So it's not yes, there are many cases of abuse with serial killers, but it doesn't mean that a loving family can't have that. So I don't know. So the nature versus nurture is kind of an interesting. I don't think there's an answer, but maybe. I don't know if anyone else. I mean, Wendy, you may feel more about nature versus nurture because you.
I mean, I think I have a fictional serial killer, Brandon, in my books, and he's very deceptive, like serial killers are, and egotistical and narcissistic and
Some
all
of them
that.
are dumb, but go ahead.
What?
Some of them are not deceptive; they're just idiots. But go ahead.
Okay. And I mean, I think part of the reason people are fascinated by serial killers is because for a period of time they got away with murder. Some of them for decades. Joseph D'Angelo, the Golden
And they
State.
can be your next door neighbor, right?
Right. 40 years it took to catch him, although they bungled about 2 or 3 attempts, which is really tragic because they probably could have, spared a bunch of victims. But anyway, I guess I look at it more simplistically. We've seen so many awful cases in the 20 years I covered crime. I always tell people that for everything we put on the air, you should see what we couldn't put on the air. And you get to a point where you don't trust anybody. But I think that intrinsically, I understand people have trauma in their lives and stuff like that. But the kind of level of evil that we've seen in cases, especially not intimate, they call them intimate crimes where you know the person, stranger crimes where you don't know the person.
Yeah.
That they're so sadistic and so evil, and these people get off on it, that I do believe anyone who kills is born that way. I think, maybe every serial killer has trauma, but every person who's traumatized doesn't become a serial killer. And I do truly believe that these people are just off. And of course, I'm not a therapist. I have no psych degree or anything like that. But just from what we've seen, there's no excuse for the kind of depraved. The behavior is so bad. It's not even. And they do get off on it. There have been victims who escaped from like Polly Klaas, the one who killed her. There was someone who did escape from that guy, and they said he was like manic when he was about to kill her. They get, not only do they not show remorse, like that's such a miscomprehension or concept, remorse, they get off on it. And I think I do think they're just pure evil. That's my take on it.
Deb, I mean, I don't want to jump in with the question, but Deb, your first book, I mean, you knew that your family knew the person who actually, right?
Yeah.
So
I knew him.
Yeah, and didn't you say that he seemed like a nice guy? And
yeah, he was known around town as a teddy bear.
But that's the dual personality thing, the dual life. That it's all part of a game to them. That's how they all get off on that.
You see it as a game.
Fooling everyone.
I don't necessarily see it always as a game. Now, I'm not going to talk about her every single person, but I kind of do believe that in some cases, when they go into this other part of themselves, they're not the reason why they're not imposters, right? And actually, I talked to my therapist about this concept, yesterday, just to get his take on it. And, and he taught me this term, the looking glass self, right? Which, I remember from, as you kind of see yourself and believe who you are based on what you see in the mirror. So I think that if these people sometimes do believe that, it's kind of like when you're dating someone and they seem like this great person, then they do this awful stuff. It's like, how could that same person? In some ways, people separate and they're not completely one way or the other, but they also sometimes believe that they are that good person. And when they do the other stuff, they believe that that's who they are too, whether they have remorse or not. So I don't know if they are pretending to be the good person, I guess is my question. You know what I mean?
Well, I would jump in and say, like Gary Ridgway, when he went to soccer games with his son Matthew, I think he was looking at his watch like, got 4 hours, I got to go kill some more girls tonight. Like his game's got to wrap up. I don't think he was thinking, I'm a great dad.
But he went to the game.
Well, he went to the game because it's part of his dual life. They always present that they're just part of the background.
It's a lot of work to actually, if they the son of Sam lived by himself and all that kind of stuff. So, but the ones that are families and have kids, you don't think that they really do love in their way. You don't think that they really do love their families?
There are a lot of shitty fathers who aren't serial killers, so I would assume a serial killer.
No, I know. I agree. I think there's so many shitty fathers, but then I think, could there be a good father? That is a serial killer. That's the question I'm asking.
Well, I differ here. I do think that these guys, I think they live as mundane life as they can to cover their tracks, and they're always thinking about their next kill. That's their entire obsession, is thinking about their next kill. Okay, and they can walk their daughter down the aisle, but it doesn't mean they're not,
No, and I'm no psychologist either. Yeah. I just kind of think that there's more room for other things, and when you can be completely right. And I also want, please, everyone who's listening, I am not like advocating or holding up, the flag to support serial killers. I just think that within the world of how humans are so complicated.
But they're actually not complicated. They're just evil.
Mm.
Really, I think they're the
That's
most
where-
simplistic people. They're just evil.
All right,
They're
that's
just
what
evil
we'll
driven
agree.
by one emotion.
All right, that's where we disagree to disagree.
Yeah.
But because
Deb,
you know, go,
Yeah.
Deb. What do you think about evil?
Deb, you're going to be the tiebreaker here. Where do you come down?
Well, here comes Debbie Downer, but as the child of 2 Holocaust survivors who survived the Holocaust and whose entire families were decimated, all I can think about is a murder machine where all the participants would wake up in the morning and have breakfast with their families, kiss their wives and children goodbye, and then go off to their day job, which was murdering people.
No,
Mm.
and that's very true. And are these evil acts?
And there is no other way to describe it but evil, an evil that permeated an entire society.
And I'm not. I mean, I think it is evil, and yes, the whole society. And I don't disagree with that concept. But I think that person, and this is what scares me more than anything, would be sitting down and having breakfast with their family that they love, and then going off and doing these evil things as if it's just part of their job. And I kind of think in a lot of ways, serial killers are similar to that too. I think that, they could love their kids and their family and then go off and do this other thing and not even, and I think that's why another reason why is they keep things so separate, because they in some ways even protecting their families from things.
I would just go to a quick thing from Dexter. If anyone watched that show, there was one episode or scene where he was looking around at everyone hugging their partners and kissing, it was, I forget which kind of an outdoor picnic or whatever it was. And he said something like, wow, like, I wonder if I could ever feel that. Like he would put his arm around his, but he felt nothing. Like they don't love their kids. They're incapable of love. They don't love their wives. They don't love anything. They're sick people, and they do incredibly depraved, sadistic things methodically for years. And there's just no wiggle room there. Like I think closure is a ridiculous term. You can't have closure if you have close person murder. That's just ridiculous. And remorse is ridiculous. Cold-blooded killers don't have remorse. I don't know why people ever expect them. They sit in court, like Kohberger had no remorse. Of course he had no remorse. He wanted to be Ted Bundy. He wanted to be Danny Rolling. He was obsessed with killing people. He had done other things. They trace back to him and stuff like that. These are really sick people. There is no wiggle room here. They're just sick, deranged, evil people, and they don't love their families. They don't love anybody. They're not capable of love. They're sociopaths, psychopaths, whatever.
Liz and Greg, did you have any idea that today's episode was going to be so depressing?
Oh, no, not at all. And here's what's funny. I mean, listeners will know this if they've listened to past episodes, but Greg and I both also have unique connections to this topic. And this brings me to a question that's coming up, which is related to the fact that Greg grew up next to Thomas Harris, who of course wrote Silence of the Lambs, and he's a family friend. And it occurs to me that, I mean, he created, I think, one of the most fascinating and most copied or attempted serial killers in the history of literature, Hannibal Lecter.
Great character.
And I wonder from all of your perspectives, because certainly from mine, when I've tried to write serial killers, that has felt like the bar is so high, but it's also not a real person. I know he based elements of Hannibal on real life serial killers, but that is like the first serial killer who had that kind of charisma, had like fine tastes, was really sophisticated, was a psychologist. So I'm wondering, as writers, and then you guys have these actual real life experiences and perspectives, do you find yourselves torn between what's going to make a better story? Like what's going to make a better character, like nuanced and, all the things, and what's more accurate to how these guys really are, which is, in my experience, I worked with Anne Rule. I have a lot of knowledge about Gary Ridgway and Ted Bundy. I had a lot of conversations with her, and her opinion was, they're like lizards, they're snakes, they are dead inside, they are killing machines, and that's someone who spent time with Ted Bundy in a basement at the suicide hotline night after night, and he had the mask of being a human, but at the end of the day, and this was just, what I gleaned from her, and I've never been in the room as far as I know with the serial killer, But I would be curious what you guys think, like that kind of fact versus fiction, developing these characters and the high bar of someone like Hannibal Lecter and the shadow it casts on all of us trying to write them.
I think that Ann was completely right. I think it's interesting that you bring up the PNW. I've spent some time, a fair amount of time out there. And Ted Bundy and Gary Ridgway, there's like a disproportionate number of very well-known serial killers.
Right.
I feel that like I when I was doing my chapter in the new book on serial killers, I never really looked into Ted Bundy details of his crimes, and even at Court TV, I would avoid looking at autopsy photos because I just couldn't deal with it. So I did look into a lot of his crimes, and I never realized how bad they were, the way he killed his victims. And these people are dead inside. You couldn't do that kind of thing if you had a shred of normal anything. You just couldn't. So and in terms of characters, I understand that Hannibal Lecter is a very unique character that lends itself fantastically to movies and TV and all of that kind of stuff. But I feel like the serial killer I developed did have a backstory, but I think he also didn't have to be over the top, eating faces and all this. I think that the way he would go about killing his victims and the way he thought, and I did try to give a very, in the second book more than the first. In the first, he was sort of in the shadows. The second book, he was like the main character in a certain way. And I feel like I did communicate the way he thought and why he got off on it, and it was all a game to him, and he got bored easily with people and his situation, and he was on a revenge tour. But so I don't think obviously Hannibal Lecter is a legendary fictional serial killer, but I don't think in terms of writing, I didn't look at people like that and say, gee, I can never write a serial killer that great. I think you don't have to make it completely over the top as long as you make the person three-dimensional and that people can really understand their motivation, how they think, how they approach their victim. That there were times he would kill someone and say he was just looking, he said, I'm just bored, I'm just going to kill her now. Like, I can't listen to her anymore, kind of thing. And I think that's how a lot of them think.
And, I just want to preface this where, yes, I do believe that, and it's hard that there can be pure evil, right, in someone, or that there's some, psychotic break, or, or that they really don't feel anything, right? I mean, I think that's different, sociopath, whatever. But why Hannibal Lecter was one of my favorite characters of all time is because I was really struck by how, first thing I ever read where somebody that does these awful things, you kind of root for a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you kind of he eats faces, and then you kind of are his corner, and you might not want to have him to come to dinner, but you do want to kind of get to know him more. And when he gets away, you're almost like, yay. And it's kind of a very uncomfortable feeling. And I would have never sat down and said, I'm going to write a serial killer, right? Mm-hmm. I really did start off with this voice, and it did turn out, I mean, it was first and turned out, it was in the voice of a little bit of what my father was. And then when I didn't ever make that decision until these things started happening in the story. And I'm like, wow, this guy really believes what he's doing. So if that's not possible in real life, that's one thing. But what I'm really curious about when we're writing characters, and maybe that's why I do fiction, because in reality, I do think there is sometimes just is one way or the other. There's a complexity that I'm really curious about. I'm curious about a character that can be a loving friend, and then, do something awful to somebody that they, and I'm not even, doesn't even have to be a serial killer. And so I think, the reality of the way serial killers are, or maybe betrayed, or all the arguments, we can't forget the thousands, unfortunately, hundreds, whatever, of the victims and the horrible things. But what I'm very curious always what's behind that, right? Even if something's evil, I want to know, well, what's behind that evil? And maybe these are asking questions that have wasting my time, and this is kind of why I don't get enough writing done, because I'm thinking about things.
My short answer to this is that
that wasn't short. Go ahead.
My brief answer to this.
We got a lot of
my succinct, non-rambling answer to this.
Oh, I was rambling.
No.
I'm joking.
No. That I didn't spend that much time talking about the perpetrators and spent a lot more time talking about the victims, just because the nature of my stories, I felt like it was my obligation to be a voice for the victims more. maybe not so much in my upcoming book, which is,
very disturbing.
a little bit
Exactly.
funny, right?
No, yes, definitely.
I mean, I hope.
Disturbing way.
It's so funny. We're talking about imposters, and my blurbs for the new book are just coming in. And every time somebody says, "Oh, I really liked it," like I really just want to press and say, "Really? Did you really like it? Did you like? Are you lying to me? Did you really like it? Tell me more. Tell me more."
Well,
I just wanted to add also the Clutter case, in Cold Blood. They put a pillow under the son's head in the basement before they shot him. Like, that's not compassion. That's like messing with your victims. And the same thing with Dennis Rader, BTK, with one of his victims. The girl was getting hysterical, as people would when they realized they're about to be murdered. So he got her a glass of water, and then he killed her. Like that's not compassion. That's not like, oh, they're so complicated. Like, that's like they just like to mess with everybody. Right? Because if they were any compassion, say, maybe I shouldn't kill this girl. Like, maybe she.
Well, we can't talk. But do you really think, what you call it, compassion, call it whatever, that reason why he gave her water, it could be because he was messing with her and he wanted to say, "Oh, like, I'm not going to kill you," or could he just got her a glass of water? I don't know. I mean, it's just, I don't know. You're probably right in these cases. I'm just like curious about,
Oh, I'm right. I have no doubt I'm right.
All right.
I'd love to pick up on the thread that Deb laid out a few minutes ago, kind of getting into imposter syndrome, which is, sort of the undercurrent of this podcast. And it's always interesting to hear, everyone's sort of individual version of that, how it affects their work, how they kind of, what headspace they come in with. Would everyone be willing to kind of, discuss their version a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just will say quickly that it took me, I was writing at a young age, but it took me like my whole life. I even had an MFA and I still couldn't call myself a writer. And I work with, I've been teaching for decades and I work with writers, and these are very accomplished people. I mean, some of them are accountants, but attorneys and therapists and high profile and a lot of the things they do. And when it comes to their writing, they don't believe that they're good enough. It's like what Deb was saying. I mean, I still, you get a book out and it can win an award or whatever, and you still don't believe it's true, and why I talked about this with my therapist, he said, "Well, look at you." And he reminded me, he said, it's kind of funny how he came out, but he said, if I met you without knowing other parts of you, I think you were really a together person who was very confident. And then he goes, "No, I know these other." I said, "Oh yeah." And he's like, "Well, you know what I mean." And I'm like, "No, do I?" But yeah. But then there's that whole part of it where he also pointed out something like, I said, "Well, I've been in therapy a lot of years. I've grown, I don't care so much what people think, supposedly." And then he pointed out that my book, and this is not just to plug this, but won a IPPY award. It won a gold medal for an ebook. Sure. When I got the award, the announcement, now, of course, there are a lot of scams out there, but I knew the IPPY awards, but I thought it was either a mistake or they were a scam. So or they just wanted money because, and that's okay. There's some awards. So I actually wrote them and said, so is something I got to pay for, and the woman very politely said, "No, this is the real thing. And you don't have to pay for any." I mean, it was just like and then I found out my publisher had submitted it, and I'm like, of course I know. I even knew what the award was, but is this idea that I'm not deserving of it, or, my writing's not good enough. And even when you get past that, you think after years of doing it, there's still that little voice that comes in that says, "Really? Are you really, come on, when you were 12, you were really sure that you couldn't do it, even though you did it anyway." So I don't know. It's all that kind of stuff. So I think that I don't know. I'm always very fascinated by people that don't have that as a writer or creative person. But for me, it's just like managing it and yelling out loud to that voice, "Shut up." You know what I mean? But it's hard. That's why we have other writers in support group and to tell each other, like what Deb said, "Is the book really good?" I was kind of shocked because when you hear someone else do it, I'm like, why would you even think it's not? But then, of course, she's in the writer's brain, right? And I'm in the fan's brain. Right? So what about you've never felt like an imposter, right?
Who are you asking?
I was asking Wendy. Did I say Wendy? Yeah.
Oh, no. Are you asking me? Well, I feel like I'm new to writing because, again, it was never my goal to be an author. But now that I'm doing it, I love doing it. And I love writing, and I'm very excited about this new book. But I think when I sat down to write the first book, I thought, it was just like a thing. Like I had no idea if it was going to go anywhere. And then the second book came much quicker and all of that.
But did you believe you could do it? Did you have Did you believe you could do it?
I mean, I guess I don't know when I wrote the first book. I don't know what I expected, where I expected to lead. I think that I did get the woman who voiced my books on Audible, Libby McKnight. She's somewhat known, I think. She wrote me this profuse message after she voiced the second book, and she went to Juilliard and Harvard, and she's like a big voice person, and she said, "Thank you so much for giving me characters I could root for," and on and on and on. And I was so taken aback by it. And I was one of those days where I thought, should I really be doing this? Like, is this like I do feel like that,
Yeah.
And then it seems like just when you're always getting into those kind of modes, someone does something that makes you think, no, I should be doing it, and tune out all the negativity. But I valued her opinion because I think she's very smart and she voices a lot of books, and she obviously did really take to my characters. And I have to say, as much as I love writing, I love my characters, and I do miss the characters from, you created this world, and I was going to do a third book, but I switched to and make it a trilogy, and maybe I'll get back to that at some point, but I had this idea for nonfiction, so that's what I'm working on now. But that meant a lot to me, and it did get me, and it doesn't mean that my book's going to sell more or anything like that, but it's just some validation that I have a right to be a writer, which I guess anyone does. And as long as you're enjoying it, I don't have any huge expectations necessarily, but as long as you're enjoying it. And to me, it's been therapy from my job. And this book particularly is rehashing, 20 years of all these different crimes and topics and things that people never heard about, even in well-known crimes, weird things that went on, and the way we processed everything at Court TV. And we met a lot of the people who were acquitted. They would come by and visit us, and we'd always take a second look at them and say, yeah, like maybe the jury got it wrong and stuff like that. So I think I'm excited about working on that, but I think most people in any creative field have constantly doubt themselves. I think people in general constantly doubt themselves.
Yeah, Deb, you were talking a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was given a choice for career. It was either be a lawyer or be a concert pianist. Those were the two choices. And even though I was always a good writer and I loved writing, and then, I alluded to that romance that I wrote back in the 90s when I had my first child, and she was a really good napper. And I thought to myself, okay, I'll just write a book while she's taking naps. And I did. I wrote like a huge manuscript, like 100 and whatever plus thousand words, and sent it in. And I was still living in Canada at the time, but I sent it to a bunch of New York publishers and got back this glowing letter from Pocket Books, I think it was, and framed it. Now I have it framed. But the letter was, this really great reaction to the manuscript, but it required edits. And then when I got that letter back, I kind of froze, like I was paralyzed and thinking, I tricked them. So I'm like, now what am I going to do? Because I really can't write. And they somehow were led to believe through this manuscript that I could. And instead of doing the edits and getting published, which would have, moved my whole career up 20 years, I didn't do it. And the manuscript just sat on the shelf collecting dust. My biggest regret. So talk about him. Yeah, I was absolutely paralyzed with imposter syndrome back then.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I talked to a student. She's in one of my novel class, and she's a really good writer. And she actually graduated later, but from the same MFA program. And she had stopped writing like for a while. And usually we think it's because people workshopping, I think, can really hurt work if it's too early. So usually it's that negative feedback that stops us. But she got glowing on the book that she's now finally finishing. But she got such glowing feedback from other people that she couldn't write anymore because she didn't know how she could kind of keep up at that level. So talk about us not feeling, we can't even, and I've been there. We don't take in always the positive stuff. Yeah. We're like, oh yeah. 20 people, you said, oh, how great something is. But that one person who you wouldn't even want to know, says something negative, and you're just like,
Yeah, one bad review.
But
I had Samantha Downing recently talking about this, right? Like if you have success with one book and then you have to keep that momentum going and keep challenging yourself and competing with yourself, that's hard.
Well, it also occurs to me too, there's like really two kind of parts of imposter syndrome for creatives and writers in particular. There's like the internal imposter syndrome, and then there's the external. So it's like, where does it really hit you more? And is it when you're sitting in the chair and writing, are you feeling self-doubt? Or is it when you're promoting or getting the blurbs? Or, so I'm curious for you guys, do you feel more centered and peaceful when you're in the actual writing? Do you enjoy the promoting of it? How do you feel about reviews? Any and all of the above?
Yeah. For me, I love getting lost in the writing. And, I write, I'm a slow writer because I keep writing and then reading it back to myself and going back again and again. But for me, it's a very musical process, I guess, because of my background. And I love to hear the sound of the words and the sentences that I'm creating. So for me, there's a rhythm and a musicality to it. So I love getting lost in that whole world. The whole world of promotion and social media is very scary to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think that if I'm in the right place of mind and, and the work is just going and I'm not criticizing myself, because that imposter syndrome like comes out in so many different ways where, and it's funny, I used to be someone that just would get out a first draft. Like I tell my students, your answer's in that first draft, so let it be messy. And that really worked for me. And I think now I'm working on like a fourth book, and I was stuck for, I don't know, a lot of last year because because of all the stuff I knew or thought I was supposed to do, I was trying to make something work that wasn't me. So because I wasn't approaching the story or the characters, all of a sudden I started approaching things as a writer, and that kind of like immediately stops me. And I think that the promotion and marketing, I love the people you meet, but it's so much work, and you always feel like even I'm on a podcast. We're authors. We're supposed to be talking about our book, and you always feel weird. Like I don't want to be too hard about pushing it, but if I don't mention it, and it's just like, I don't. Yeah, that's it's hard. So
I really do enjoy the writing, and especially what I'm working on now, because it's so different writing nonfiction. It's about me and my take, and a friend of mine told me you're part of the story, so it is totally different, and it's just flowing out and all that. And I do love doing podcasts like this. I love doing events. I was on Core TV a lot for my first book and different things like that. I love doing it, but I hate the burden of constantly feeling you have to get so many followers on Instagram, you have to reach out, you have to network, because people always say a lot of authors and writers are more introverted and private people, and it's just an ongoing burden to me. So right now I'm enjoying just writing and not having to deal with that. And I think to me that's the least appealing part of becoming an author. And I feel like I've learned a lot since when I first sat down to do this. I had no idea where this was leading. And I think a lot of first time authors, if they really understood what they were getting into, might just bag it. But I think that I enjoy the writing so much, and I think what I'm doing now to me is so personally meaningful that I'll be able to suck it up and do what I need to do after that. But I'm not looking forward to it. I'm not looking forward to it.
Yeah. I mean, because it is a different part of us. But it's funny what you just said. Grace Paley, she was a wonderful short story writer. And I had the wonderful benefit of hearing her speak twice. And she told, and one thing that stuck with me is she said to everybody as soon as we sat down, if you don't love it, because it was to a group of writers, if you don't love this, just leave. There's things that are going to be less painful and much easier for you to do that'll make you happier. And I say that at the beginning of every class, kind of as a joke. Thank God, college had been pretty upset if the adult learners got up and said, okay, I want my money back. But I'd say, if you don't love it, there's things that are easier. And one day a student came up to me and said, I just wanted to tell you, I don't love it. I have no choice. And so I really do think that a lot of the times I'm in that I had to stop. I do stop questioning. Should I still be doing this or whatever? Because it's like, all right, well, I don't think I have a choice right now, even though we all have choices, and just having to manage with the rest of it. But I do think, and I feel for all the writers that are out there, the social media, it's all like this mystery of marketing and then it's not. And it really takes so much energy, and it really, really is hard to separate that part of the work with the writing. And in the old days, whatever those old days were, I guess you had people that did all of it for you, but writers are expected to do everything. You know, even with like really great publicists and big houses, you still got to be out there promoting. And you know, even with the pseudonyms that we use, they, you know, a lot of times the publishers have asked us to use another name. You still got to go out there as you know, and you still got to talk about who you are, and you got to come up with connections, you know, in your life story, because you can't just write a story, right? It's got to be,
there's got to be a story behind the story.
Yeah. I remember when I was like 20 years ago, when somebody was talking about her book that just came out, and she said, you know, I was horrified because the character in her book was bulimic, and I was horrified when my agent said, you're not by any chance bulimic, are you? This is before it was in our bios, right? You could be the quiet, you could keep your who you were quiet, right? And she was like, yes. And she said she was horrified that they exploited it, but it's actually was selling her book. And then, you know, that seems so, yeah, of course now, but then writers, you know, people didn't have to know who you were, like the Italian author, right? Nobody knew who she was or whatever that was. It's like, you can't get away with that now, or you have to kind of let it be part of the marketing strategy, but somebody's got to be out there talking about you. I don't know.
But I think it's important for authors to realize, and it's hard, like me personally, it's been hard to absorb this, and that your sales don't necessarily correlate with how good your book is. Like you can write a really good book if you don't have the right publisher, or the right this or the right that. You know, you could probably swap with someone else who had a different agent or publisher, and maybe the books would have done differently. Like, so I think that's a very hard thing to keep telling yourself, that the book sales don't necessarily have anything to do with how good your book is. But it's easier said than done. You know, it's hard. The whole process is hard.
That's a good point.
You know, you've been writing, I mean, you've written so many amazing books, and you're even doing this podcast. So it's hard for me also to believe. It's even when Deb is talking about her not believing in herself, I'm shocked, you know, and so I can't even believe that, you know, other authors would feel the same way, which, you know, I personally do, but yeah, it's intense.
Well, as you said earlier, that I think that speaks to the importance of community, you know, in this world that we kind of inhabit in this community. It's great. With the last few minutes of our time with you, and you've mentioned it at least in passing, I think each of you, but would you guys just kind of close out with giving a little teaser of what you have coming up, what you're working on?
Sure. Who wants to go first?
I'll start. So my next book is called A Novel Crime, and it comes out in March 31st, 2026, from Thomas and Mercer. And talk about an imposter. It's full of imposters. My book.
That's what's the whole. It's great.
What's that? What'd you say?
The whole imposter syndrome is what you know. This is all part what makes that character. Yeah.
It's funny because I started out with a main character who was less of an imposter and much more feeling entitled and deluded about what she could do in terms of writing and publishing. And so that character morphed a little bit with the help of my editor. But yeah, it's about imposters, and it's about the stories that we tell ourselves, and then the trouble that we get into. And this main character just goes down a rabbit hole of all kinds of trouble in trying to achieve a dream. And I think it's set in the world of publishing, but I think it's sort of a relatable theme in terms of, you know, all of us want to succeed in whatever we're doing, whatever our endeavors are, and how far are we willing to go to reach that dream.
Nice.
And it's hopefully funny. I hope people think it's funny, because my first two were heavy.
They see the imposter syndrome coming out. It's very funny. Yes. It's also very creepy, which is why they both work together.
Well, my family says I'm not funny, so
you're wrong.
Your family said that? Yeah.
Pat?
Oh, okay. Well, talk about imposter syndrome. My last book came out in 23, and because I haven't had a book out like many people's right after, I kind of feel like, well, maybe am I really still a writer? Anyway. But I'm finally into this new book. The working title is The Disconnected, and it's also the heart of it. You know, there's kind of a somewhat cult, and there's grandmother, but thinking about the theme, the heart of it really is that imposter syndrome in terms of who we think of ourselves. And it really is, it's about how you can trust people with everything that's in you, and then they will do something that shows that they're really pretty horrible. so then you start questioning every single thing that you ever knew about them and you and all that kind of stuff. So it's dealing a little bit with those things, but it is a thriller. Yeah. So yeah, and it's also part of it takes place, in a medical environment because the woman's in med school, the main character, and she grew up, and when she goes back to where there's murder and all that stuff, is in this place. Her grandmother founded a town and actually built a town, and it's like this utopia where healthcare is there, everything that you want, but there's this other side to it that makes it work that is pretty dark and yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, see, I'm really bad at talking about my own work, but anyway, I'm very good at selling other people. Yeah, but it's fun to write right now.
It sounds good, Pat.
Oh yeah, but yeah, thank you. But also, it is fun to just when I started leading into the the more crazy parts of myself, you get to put that into the work. That starts making it easier. Yeah, to deal with.
Sure.
And Wendy?
Thanks to Debbie at BoucherCon, I have QR codes for my first 2 books.
So for listeners, Wendy is holding up QR codes for people who are watching us on YouTube.
Yes. I'm impressed anyone who got that QR code on their phone. I'm really impressed. So that's probably how I think it works. Oh, everyone has the QR code now. Anyway, as I've already mentioned, I'm working on a nonfiction book about my 20 years of covering crime. I'm about I would say a third done with it, roughly, to get to. I think I'll probably have the first draft done by January. And it's very therapeutic, as I've already mentioned as well. And I'm going through all different cases and things that happened at Core TV, things that happened on Nancy's show, inside baseball stuff, the effect it has on the producers covering this stuff. Different people like Vincent Bugliosi I spent time with, and Jerry Boyle, who was Jeffrey Dahmer's attorney, and all the inside stories I heard from them. So I think anyone who's into true crime would have to just love it, because it's just giving such a unique perspective that I don't think anyone's ever done quite a book like this that I'm aware of. No one I've worked with has done it, and they're pretty much all the crime people.
They're not going to do like you, even if they did. So, yeah.
So, and then all my friends and former colleagues came through for me on my other 2 books. So this is really lends itself to being on their shows, like Ashley Banfield and Nancy and just a whole slew of them, Core TV again. So I feel like it is probably easier to promote it, and we'll see. But I'm excited about it. It feels great to be writing again, and it's very different than writing fiction and a crime thriller. But it's so from the heart, and every day I think of another thing I need to put in that happened. And we had like Mel Brooks Day at Core TV when he came on this us all day, and just funny things like that. So so we'll see how it goes, but I'm very excited about it.
And I just quickly want to just say that working with Wendy and Deb has really helped imposter syndrome a lot, because you like you said, community and getting that support, but also understanding what we're all going through, right? And it's important to have somebody tell you you're crazy and this is actually good, and even though you know it, you still want to hear it, so anyway. And thank you.
Do we know it?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, well, we are big fans of safety in numbers at Imposter Hour, as Greg and I have realized many years ago when we started writing together. But Deb and Pat and Wendy, thank you so much for spending time with us. We are going to link all of your social media platforms and your books when we share with our listeners about the show airing. And I'm going to let Greg take us out.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you. Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg is created and hosted by us, Elizabeth Keenan and Greg Wands. The show is produced and edited by Bookwild Collective founder Kate Herget. Scott Leeds composed our original theme music, and Steve Luoma designed our logo. Thanks for being with us today. Enjoyed.